Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the opportunity to deliver a statement on Fiji's delegation's engagement at COP29, which concluded on 24th November in Baku, Azerbaijan. Mr. Speaker, sir, the government has recognized climate change as the greatest security threat of our times and one that we cannot address alone. Mr. Speaker, sir, government acknowledges the importance of engaging in multilateral processes such as the Climate Change Conference of Parties, COP, to ensure our voices are heard and the challenges we face are recognized and addressed. Mr. Speaker, sir, before I provide an update on COP29 outcomes, I would like to extend my sincere and deep gratitude to all civil servants and officials involved in preparations for COP29 and their direct engagement in the negotiations held in Baku. I want to take this opportunity also to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for giving me the opportunity to lead the Fiji delegation this year, and for his advocacy and leadership both at the regional level and at the international level. I would also like to acknowledge our Chief Negotiator, P.S. Sivendra Michael, Ambassador Amena Yovoli, and other senior people within the team for providing timely and expert advice across the agenda items and throughout what was a very contentious and difficult negotiation process. Mr. Speaker, sir, we were very well prepared this year, led by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, with support from the Ministry of Finance. We organized technical working group meetings, prepared well-consulted policy briefs, prepared a communications strategy, and held pre-departure delegation briefings for both ministers and government officials. In the interest of transparency and accountability, we announced the Fiji government delegation disclosed how much government funds were being utilized and funding sources for delegates, and held press conferences to answer any questions from the media and public, unlike what we saw in the previous years. It was always our intention that this process be people-centered and context-sensitive, transparent, and accountable. This year, Fiji took a 57-member delegation to COP. 90% of the delegates were fully funded by external partners and through funding arrangements in place annually to support small island state participation in these critical meetings. The total cost of COP29 engagement to government was only 239,000 Fijian dollars, contrary to some of the misinformation or disinformation with figures such as 6 million, etc., put out by people, perhaps outside of this parliament. Mr. Speaker, sir, we ensured that our delegation was interagency and multi-stakeholder, engaging various ministries, indigenous people reps, civil society, youth, academia, and even members of the opposition. And we were, Mr. Speaker, sir, one of the few countries at COP which had in our delegation the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and two other members. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for his participation and for his contribution and support to the delegation in Baku. I would also like to say, Mr. Speaker, that government had made a strategic decision at this COP to send a larger ministerial delegation due to the high political nature of this year's negotiations, and a decision which allowed us to engage fully when key unresolved negotiation issues were taken to the ministerial level for decisions. Mr. Speaker, this year Fiji identified 14 priority thematic engagement areas, including climate finance, loss and damage, oceans, mitigation, adaptation, indigenous peoples and local communities, and gender, to name a few amongst others. There were over 90 agenda items under discussion, and our negotiators worked in teams to cover all relevant items. Each thematic area was assigned a ministerial lead, thematic lead, co-lead, and support officials. I must say that it is a testament to the dedication and commitment of the Fiji government delegation that we were able to not only cover each priority thematic area, but also, Mr. Speaker, influence outcomes at key junctures. Mr. Speaker, addressing the climate crisis is not just crucial for our environment, it is crucial for protecting the lives and livelihoods of Fijian people and protecting the stability and growth of our economy. To be able to respond effectively the scale of the challenge we face as a small island state, we need to face and access predictable and adequate climate financing. COP29 in Baku was dubbed as the finance COP because all parties were mandated to agree to a new target for the amount of climate financing that parties would commit to deploy annually to support developing countries. This new target was required to replace the current target to deploy 100 billion USD per year as climate finance. The new target, referred to as the new Collective Quantified Goal, NCQG, has been under negotiation for over 2 years and was required to be agreed at COP29. And given the slow progress to date to reduce global emissions and support resilient building, developing countries urgently require financing to implement both their mitigation commitments and adaptation plans. At COP29, Mr. Speaker, our negotiation teams worked diligently to secure the best possible outcome across the negotiation streams. In many cases, both ministers and negotiators started the day early in the morning, 6 a.m. sometimes, and often finishing early hours of the next morning, sometimes as far as 3 or 4 a.m. We faced many challenges given the state of current geopolitics, and in the final days of COP29, SIDS and least developed countries were left with no choice but to actually walk out of the negotiation room as our priorities had not been properly accounted for within the financial decision text that was before us. Although the situation was politically and technically challenging, this action served to increase the ambition and ensured that there was no risk that parties would adopt decisions that represented a step backwards. Fiji, Barbados, and Samoa, as well as high-level representatives from least developed countries, and the European Union, the US, and others, including Australia, constituted a small group of 15 individuals that in a closed room setting negotiated to salvage the COP29 finance deal. Together, SIDS and LDCs represented the majority of developing countries, and we used our weight as small island developing states, IOCs, as a joint bloc to push for progress and ambition. While the final outcome somewhat falls short of our expectations, Mr. Speaker, it represents a significant improvement from the original vision we faced, and in fact it does not cross our red lines. The final COP29 decision on the new quantified collective goals call for climate financing from all public and private sources to reach USD 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. And within that goal, Mr. Speaker, is the commitment to ensure developing countries take the lead on providing 300 billion USD per year by 2035. While this goal represents a tripling of the financing floor, developed countries are currently committed to, and it sits within the broader $1.3 trillion goal. I know the deal has been criticized for seeking to achieve the 300 billion through a wide variety of sources, and for the decision to include contributions from developing countries to multilateral development banks within the scope of the sources contributing to this target. So in fact, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would know, the discussion on the contributor base took a lot of time, particularly in the first week, Mr. Speaker said. While this is a pronounced challenge for some of the larger and wealthier high-emitting developing countries, it is less of an issue in our context and circumstances, and we can take some comfort with the understanding that an increase has been committed to alongside elements of the decision which recognize the need to address many of the excess issues we face. The decision includes commitment to support nationally led approaches and simplify access to international climate funds. While the decision falls short of the direct commitment to scale up financing for loss and damage, it does recognize loss and damage issues and includes specific mention of the need to develop new and specific solutions for SIDS and LDCs. In fact, Mr. Speaker said the IOC's position, which includes us, the Pacific Small Island Developing States, we initially went into the negotiating room with a $39 billion finance floor. That obviously was not acceptable, but we see the $300 billion as a floor, and we feel that a large chunk of that should be available for small island developing states. The other significant event, Mr. Speaker said, is the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund. In fact, the World Bank is going to be the financial intermediary, and we hope that all the mechanisms, the processes, the board for the fund for responding to loss and damage has also been appointed, and we are hoping that by at least 2026, small island developing states would be able to access some of those funding. Mr. Speaker said this new finance goal will replace the previous $100 billion per year target, and despite some of the gaps in the cohesiveness of the decision, government will work to ensure that the new targets and commitments are seen through in our engagement with development partners and international climate funds. We have no choice but to hold parties to account and to ensure this deal will translate into the new and additional financing we need urgently to increase and scale up our response to climate change here in Fiji. Other important outcomes, Mr. Speaker, achieved this year include progress to further agree guidance and rules for carbon market mechanisms. The Honourable Prime Minister talked about this the other day. An agreement on new guidelines for transparent climate reporting, the extension of the enhanced Lima work program on gender and climate change, and a decision confirming the institutional arrangements between the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. Mr. Speaker, one other issue that we advocated very strongly and pushed for was the funding allocation for the new Pacific Resilience Fund, which the economic ministers, including Australia and New Zealand, agreed for Tonga to host the secretariat. That fund, we are targeting $250 million by the end of this year, and I know Australia and New Zealand have both committed significant funding towards the Pacific Resilience Fund. And we are hoping that by 2026, that fund will also be operational, and that a lot of those funding that would be available for Pacific Island countries, and in fact, the decision to set up the PRF was a decision of the Pacific Islands. It was approved by the finance ministers this year. We are going to have a special finance ministers meeting in March to ensure that all the legal and financial and institutional mechanisms are put in place and that the fund would be ready and available for Pacific Island countries by 2026. And the other advantage of that fund, Mr. Speaker, would be that a lot of those could be localized at the community level to build community resilience for the Pacific Islands in the future. Mr. Speaker, I must say that I was actually feeling very good, and I must say that I was proud of the leadership of our delegation across the COP29 negotiations. Fiji was appointed as the G77 and China coordinator for adaptation, where they were entrusted to coordinate a group of 134 member states. Our officials continued to coordinate Pacific priorities in relation to loss and damage through active engagement in the board of the fund for responding to loss and damage. In addition, our PS for Environment and Climate Change was selected as co-chair of the Oceans and Climate Change Dialogue alongside Brazil and Belgium. And again, this was negotiated by us through our respective grouping and bilateral meetings. And Fiji worked with the large Friends of the Ocean constituency to agree the landscape and the language of the annual ocean statement, which was delivered on behalf of 93 parties in the closing plenary by the Permanent Secretary for Climate and Environment. Beyond the negotiations, Mr. Speaker, the ministerial high-level delegation, along with relevant officials, engaged in various side events and bilateral meetings, stakeholder meetings. Many of them, the ministers who were there, explored a range of new and emerging potential partners to support our efforts. And the delegation, through these engagements and the media, amplified Fiji's needs, challenges, and achievements in ways that will continue to unlock benefits beyond the scope of COP29. Mr. Speaker, ultimately we have to understand that this is a multilateral process and there are always going to be difficult challenges, compromises, and trade-offs to navigate. But I must say that we, again, Fiji played a very important role. Fiji was seen as a leader amongst the IOC's group, and our negotiators lived up to those expectations. Mr. Speaker, we have to always remember who we do this for. And we must continue to work with the coalition with willingness to overcome the challenges put in place by those that resist the science and its implications. Our future depends on it. Our children and grandchildren depend on us as leaders to ensure that there is a sustainable future for all. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all those who were part of the delegation, including those who were funded by other agencies but had the Fiji badge, were part of the Fiji delegation and supported the Fiji delegation in all our negotiations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, the Honourable